So now the Championship season has wrapped up, I thought that now would be a good time to rank how I think each individual club has got on over the 2018-19 season. For this video, I'll be dividing the clubs into 5 separate categories. Teams have either had a very good season, a good season, an okay season, a bad season, or an awful season. And I'd be interested to know from you guys, where would you put your club? Also, as we have now reached the end of the season, let me know down below if you guys have any suggestions for any videos you'd like to see coming up over the summer. But apart from that, we will just hop into ranking the clubs. So we'll go through the teams in just a random order, but I'm interested to see what some of you guys have to say about this. So like I said, we'll go through this one in a random order, starting it out with Swansea City. I'm going to throw them into the okay category. I think that Swansea had pretty much the season I expected them to have, really. After coming down into the Championship after being relegated, they lost a lot of that squad they had in the Premier League. They reinvested a little bit of money back into the squad, but the majority of the onus was on bringing through some of the players from the youth academy and bringing up a lot of young talent. I think that Graham Potter in that aspect did a very good job. Some of the transfers worked out for them. Players like Bertrand Selina, I think, went on to have a very good season. Other ones, not so much. Players like Joe Lasoro came in for quite a bit from Sunderland. He never really got going. I'd like to see a bit more of Joe Lasoro for Swansea next season, and maybe then he can hit his levels. You know, he is still a fairly young player. But overall, I think that Swansea have had a decent season. I'm quite disappointed, actually, that Graham Potter has left them, because Swansea were one of the clubs who I was fancying that next season they could go for a real top 6 push, but maybe with a couple of key players leaving and the manager gone now as well, I'm not sure how they'll fare next season. With Ipswich Town, they're only going to make it into one place in this list, unfortunately. It has been an awful season for Ipswich. Sat rock bottom of the table. They went on to lose 25 matches. They conceded 77 goals and only scored 36. After the summer they were pretty much destined for failure, really. They sold 3 of their most influential players from the season before: Joe Garner, Martin Wycon and Adam Webster. They looked to have a new recruitment policy under Paul Hurst as he tried to bring in a new brand of football. I think it was too much change too fast for Ipswich, and the transition from the season before under Mick McCarthy, thing just went off the rails fairly swiftly. So for Ipswich, it has to be an awful season. Absolutely no one expected Norwich to be as good as they went on to be. Of course they're going to go in the top bracket, as they had an unbelievable season. I think the best thing that Norwich did throughout the year was the recruitment in the summer, really. You know, they sold the likes of Madison and Murphy, recruited over 30 million in transfer fees, and in the way they spent it was fantastic. They brought in Tim Krul on a free transfer, Pookie came in on a free, Buendia and Leitner for just over £1 million each. We spoke a lot on the channel throughout the year on the job that Daniel Farke's done there and the turnaround that he's seen over Norwich, but the job that Stuart Webber's done behind the scenes with everything going on, absolutely staggering, the turnaround that's been at Norwich over the past couple of years. And it's no surprise to see Manchester United being linked with Stuart Webber as potentially their next technical director. They were very savvy in the transfer market, played some brilliant football going forward, scored 93 goals, which is more than what Wolves scored when they were promoted. And they're definitely going to be a team who I'm going to be keeping my eye on in the Premier League next season, because I think that if they can shape up their defence a little bit more, they really could do some damage in the Premier League. Next up for Rotherham, I'm going to put them in the bad category and not the awful category. I know they did go on to get relegated, but they were at least competitive throughout the season, you know, opposed to like Ipswich or Bolton and how unhappy their fans have been for the majority of the season. I think that Rotherham still enjoyed the ride despite going on to get relegated in the end. Their major downfall was probably their defensive record. They went on to concede 83 goals, which was the worst in the Championship. Despite that, they did still score quite a few goals. They went on to score 52. They picked up some decent results along the season, had a pretty good record at home, and considering how little they've spent in the past few years, they were a lot more competitive than a lot of people expected them to be. And then we've got Leeds to discuss. Despite them throwing it away in the final hurdle, I'm still going to say that they had a good season, and rightly so. I think, you know, Bielsa managed to take a team who finished 13th last season, brought them up 10 places to finish 3rd. They missed out on automatic promotion, and of course had that bonkers playoff semi-final against Derby. Maybe one of the things that eventually let Leeds down in the end was their recruitment over the summer. I think that the majority of people who played well this season were players who didn't particularly have good seasons the year before. I think that Bielsa coached them into being better players. You know, if you look at some of the signings they made, people like Patrick Bamford, Barry Douglas, even to a certain extent Kiko Casilla, neither of them really went on to excel throughout the season. And I think if they have a more successful summer campaign this season, then they really will be pushing for the top 2 next season once again. At times, I think they probably were the most entertaining side to watch in the Championship, with the high pressing football, the intensity on and off the ball. It was just those final 6 games of the season which went on to let them down in the end. But I'm in no doubt, I think that with Bielsa staying on another season, Leeds will be back stronger next year. Reading have had a really bizarre season. Overall, I'm going to put them in the bad category, because realistically they have been fighting relegation all season and they will have had hopes to do better things than that. But realistically, their season can be split in 2 halves. You know, when Jose Gomez came in and they made the signings in January, I think that a lot of moods changed around the club, really. You know, the style of football got a lot better, the results started to pick up, they were scoring more goals and players were coming back into form. At the start of the season, it was a really unhappy camp around Reading, you know, under Paul Clement. Some of the signings that he'd made in the summer really weren't working out. It was looking like the club was only going to go in one direction. If they did stick with that throughout the season and they didn't make the signings they did in January, Reading probably would have been going down. So they made the right decision in the end to keep hold of Gomez. I'm interested to see what they managed to do over this summer transfer window. Overall, it has been a bad season, but with a positive slant in it towards the end. West Brom was a bit of a difficult one as to where to place them. I've gone for the okay category. Realistically, I think a lot of people thought they may be challenging for automatic promotion. They went on to make the playoff semi-finals. This could have been their best chance to get back up to the Premier League. I think that with them potentially having a bit of a rough summer with the board making cutbacks, I'm not sure how competitive they'll be at the top of the Championship going into next season. It's also worth remembering that they did sack their manager Darren Moore earlier on in the season as well. They were competitive in where they wanted to be, but ultimately fell short of their targets, and for that reason, I'm going to say it was an okay season for West Brom. Oh dear, and then we have Stoke City. Where to begin with them? Of course they're going to go into the awful category. By far the favourites to win the league at the start of the season, and they went on to finish 16th in the table. It wasn't just the fact that, you know, they've been such a flop in terms of the results and everything like that, but some of the performances along this season, God, they were so bland to watch. They went on to score 45 goals throughout that season. Only Bolton and Ipswich scored fewer goals than Stoke, and this was a side who so much money was invested into their attacking outlets over the summer. They'd spent about £50 million, brought in some decent talents for the Championship, you know, the likes of Benicophobe, Tommins, Sam Vokes, but things just didn't click for them. Gary Rowett got the sack fairly swiftly after it was looking like performances and results weren't going in the right direction. And even since Nathan Jones has come in, there's not really been ultimately signs that Stoke will be this sort of dominating team that a lot of people thought they would be going into next season. Despite Derby missing out on promotion, I'm still going to put them in the good category. They went on to finish 6th, made it to the Championship playoff final. I think they were an entertaining side to watch throughout the season, definitely played better football than how they played last season under Rowett and made it into the same position. The only sort of question marks over Derby now is how they're going to fare over the summer, you know, with a lot of their players returning to their parent clubs and potentially them not having as much to spend over this summer. I'm interested to see if Lampard does stick it out with Derby and stays there, how they'll actually get on next season. But in terms of this season that's just gone, I'd say it's been a good one overall for Derby. And then for Blackburn Rovers, I'm going to put them in the middle category. I think they had an okay season, really, considering this was their first year back in the Championship. They never had the threat of relegation throughout the season. At some points, it looked like they may go on to do a little bit better than how they actually finished in the end. After the first few months of the season, it looked like they may go on to challenge for the top 6 this season. They fell short of that in the end. They had a really rough patch throughout February up until April where they only won 1 game in 11 fixtures. That's what really sort of derailed their season a little bit, but they did pick it up towards the end of the season, and finishing 15th in your first year back in the Championship after being promoted, I don't think you can have too many complaints about that. They'll be looking to build on it going into next season. And probably the biggest overachievers of the Championship was Sheffield United. What a season they had. And you actually forget as well, you know, they lost David Brooks in the summer, but the way they reinvested that money was absolutely fantastic. Bringing in an experienced centre-back like John Egan, getting the loan players in they did, going on to sign Oliver Norwood in January. Everything fell into place for Sheffield United, and with them getting promoted, it sort of gives hope to everyone else that when your club is run in the right way, you've always got a chance of going up there. But the way that Chris Wilder has brought on this squad from being in League One, he's developed a system which is really hard to break down. They played some fantastic football throughout the season as well. It's not just as if Sheffield United are this sort of just hard-working side that grinds out every result and stuff like that. They actually played some really attractive football. They scored some fantastic goals. Going into the Premier League, a lot of people will probably be writing Sheffield United off, but I think that under Chris Wilder and the way they continue to defy expectations, I think they're capable of anything, really. QPR was a side who I was debating with a little bit what category to put them in. I'm going to throw them into the okay category, considering that everything that went on at QPR over the summer. They were hit with a transfer embargo for January, a pretty hefty fine from the EFL as well. Everything looked to be going against QPR. I was certain that they'd be battling it out for relegation. They were one of my favourites to go down at the start of the season. Under Steve McLaren, I wasn't too sure how he'd fare as well. Obviously, eventually they did go on to sack him, but the run they had between sort of the start of the season in December, they were absolutely fantastic at one point in the season. They were up within the top 6. They went on a couple of really good unbeaten runs, playing some decent football. The loan players they brought in at the end of the transfer window, I think, went on to do really well for them. But then at the turn of the year and going into January, and from then onwards, really, everything sort of just fell apart for QPR. They only won 3 matches in 2019 in the league, which really wasn't anything to shout about. Obviously, Steve McLaren then went on to get sacked, so from that aspect, they ended the season pretty awful actually. But considering everything that had gone on at QPR over the summer and the fact that they were never really threatened for relegation, I'd say it was still an okay season for them. With Middlesbrough, I'm going to throw them into the bad category in terms of how their season's gone. I know they just narrowly missed out on the playoffs on the final day, but if you sort of just gauge the happiness of the Borough fans throughout the season, I don't think that any Middlesbrough fan will tell you that they've enjoyed the ride this season. Even when they were in the top 6, people still weren't happy with the football being played, and make no mistake about it, this Middlesbrough squad has had a lot of money invested into it over the past few transfer windows. In the summer, they spent $7 million on bringing in Aidan Flint, $7 million on George Saville, another $5 million was spent on Paddy McNair as well. You know, in the previous transfer windows, they have splashed the cash a little bit as well. The football they played throughout the season wasn't great to watch. They were one of the lowest scoring teams in the league, and despite missing out on the playoffs by 1 point, ultimately they failed to reach their objectives, and I think that pretty much everyone is unanimous in being happy that Tony Pulis won't be at Borough next season. Another club which was fairly hard to place was Nottingham Forest. I'm going to throw them into the okay category. I've got a couple of reasons for this. Obviously, throughout the season, the expectations on Forest were fairly high. They had a really big summer transfer window, brought in a lot of big names. Under Aitor Karanka, a lot of people were fancying Forest for the top 6, myself included. I think I had put them in the top 6 in my earlier prediction video. And under Aitor Karanka, they were ticking along steadily until he went ahead and left the club. There was a bit of a falling out, it seems, between him and the people in charge. And then from that point onwards, Nottingham Forest never really seemed to recover. They brought Martin O'Neill in. He really didn't get off to the best of starts with Forest. You know, he was leaving some of their better players on the bench. Carvalho couldn't get into the team. He was playing sort of a 4-4-2 formation, which went against the strengths of the majority of the squad. I think, like many people, I'm expecting a little bit more from them next season, but for a first season like this with a lot of new players coming in, it was an okay season for them. For Hull City, I'm going to throw them into the good category. I was convinced at the start of the season that they'd be battling it out for relegation, considering how last season had gone for them and the fact that they'd released about 11 players. They'd lost a real majority of the squad they had in there last season. I wasn't sure how they'd fare really. Looking at some of the players they brought in as well, their biggest signing was Reece Burke for just over £1 million. Apart from that, a lot of other people either coming in on free transfers or on loan. They finished just 8 points above the relegation zone last season, and with how the summer went for them, I was convinced that they'd regress and they'd be fighting it out at that side of the table for the majority of it, but that was not the case, and at one point it actually looked as if, you know, they went on that fantastic run that they may even go on to challenge for the top 6 this season. And Hull are one of those clubs who I see so much potential in that squad at the moment that if a little bit more was invested into it over the summer, they could really give it a good go next season, but I'm not sure how likely that is that that's actually going to happen. Sheffield Wednesday, I'm going to throw into the mid-tier and say they had an okay season. Their year really has to be split into two parts, the Steve Bruce era and the Josh Lukai era. At the start of the season, I mean, they were a shambles at times with some of their performances. Some really questionable decisions were being made, key players were being left out of the squad, the performances were really dreary, but their main problems were in defence. They were leaking goals for fun. I think that when Lukai was fired, they were only a few points off the relegation zone, and then Steve Bruce came in, and then absolutely everything was transformed around the club really. They were so much more solidified at the back. The performances took a turn from the better, and with 5 games to go, they still had an outside shot of making it into the playoffs. So with everything that went on at the club over the whole season, I'd say it was an okay one from them in the end, despite a disastrous start. And this next one's going to come as no surprise. Bolton, of course, are going to make it into the awful category. Throughout this season, they scored 29 goals. That's right, in 46 games, they only managed to muster up 29 goals. It's just been a really depressing season for Bolton fans. I really do feel for them. Everything that's gone, you know, off the pitch as well, and all that's going to be carried into next season in League One from them. It's just been a real season to forget for Bolton. Their best moments probably came at the start of the season. They actually went unbeaten in their first 4 matches. They won 3 of their opening 4. However, after that, the wheels quickly fell off, and we even saw them forfeit a match against Brentford after their players had gone on strike. Another club who really didn't have a good season was Millwall. I'm going to throw them into the bad category. In some aspects, maybe they've been a bit of a victim of their own success. Their first season back in the Championship last season, they went on and finished 8th. They had a miraculous run at the turn of the year last season, but this season they couldn't quite live up to those expectations. The performances throughout the season were drastically inconsistent. I think most people expected a bit of a drop off from Millwall, but not to the extreme that they actually went on to have. If it wasn't for the fact of Ipswich and Bolton being so diabolical for this season, then Millwall, you know, probably would have gone down. I think they're a club who definitely needs to pull their finger out over the summer, because at the moment they are probably one of the favourites to be relegated for next season, but they will be in the Championship for another year, but it wasn't a good ride for them this season. For Bristol City, I think overall they actually went on to have a good season. They missed out on the top 6, but it's the closest they've been since coming up to the Championship. In the summer, I wasn't really sure what season they go on to have after making some pretty big sales. I think they made over 25 million in some of the players they went on to lose, you know, the likes of Bobby Reed, Aidan Flint and Joe Bryan. But with some of the players they picked up, I thought they were quite savvy in the transfer market. Adam Webster and Vyman especially. It's become a bit of a meme at this point, but it is in Lee Johnson's nature and Bristol City to be a little bit streaky. You know, they'll go on a miraculous winning run and then in a few games after that they'll lose 5 on the bounce. That's sort of been the case this season, although they have gathered a little bit more consistency than what I've seen from them in previous years. And if they do continue this trend of improving year upon year, they could be shooting for the top 6 next season. I might have been a little bit harsh on Wigan here. For Wigan, I wasn't sure which category to put them in, either the okay or the bad season. For the majority of the season, they were looking over their shoulder and relegation was a real worry for them, especially in the final 3 months of the season. And when I do look at that squad, I do just think that they are capable of maybe a little bit better. You know, they did bring in some decent players in the transfer window in the summer. You know, they brought the likes of Josh Windass, Joe Garner, Kipri, and they had spent quite a bit of money on those players as well. Having Reece James on loan from Chelsea as well, I think that in some games he definitely dug them out. But ultimately it was probably their away form which let them down in the end. They went on to finish 18th, which in all circumstances probably wasn't a bad season for them. You know, they've hit all their targets. I just can't help but feel like that squad was capable of maybe a little bit better. With Brentford, I'm going to say they had an okay season. A lot of people were fancying Brentford as sort of that dark horse at the start of the year to potentially sneak into the top 6. Ultimately, they went on to finish 11th. It was probably at the back which let them down this season. Scoring goals wasn't much of an issue for them. They scored 73 and probably are one of my favourite sides to watch in the division actually. I think they play some really good flowing football going forward there. It probably didn't help them that Dean Smith went on to leave fairly early into the season. They had a bit of a spell after that when Dean Smith did leave, where they were on a bit of a rocky patch. People weren't sure whether Thomas Frank was the right man for the job, but eventually he managed to turn that around and they had a pretty positive end to the season, went on to finish 11th, and they'll be looking to build on that next season and hopefully challenge for the top 6. Preston have just had a really bizarre season. We finished 14th in the end, which is our lowest finish since being promoted back up to the Championship. We started the season absolutely awful. We were bottom of the league after 10 games. After that though, we managed to pick up our performance levels throughout the middle of the season. I thought at some point, you know, we were absolutely fantastic. We went on a couple of really good unbeaten runs. We got to within touching distance of the playoffs. However, for the past month or so of the season, we completely fell apart again. I also think our summer recruitment was fairly poor. I think we rectified that in January with a lot more positive signings we brought in. We actually went on and spent some money in January. And I think the hope among most Preston fans is that we managed to keep hold of this group of players over the summer. And for Aston Villa, I'm going to have to throw them into the top category after winning at Wembley and achieving promotion. Ultimately, that was their aim for the season, and they have gone on to do that. But what a bizarre season it has been for them, you know. At the start of the season, we had people throwing cabbages at Steve Bruce. It was looking like Villa were going to be destined for eternity in the Championship. Dean Smith came in, and even initially when Dean Smith did come in, it took a little bit of time for him to get his philosophy across, you know. It took a little bit before the performances really started rolling in for them. But once Jack Grealish got back from injury and Dean Smith really got his ideas across to this group of players, what an unbelievable run they went on. I think that these 3 promoted clubs, I am really intrigued to see how they're going to get on in the Premier League next season, because all of them have played some fantastic football throughout the year, and I can't see any of them being a real outcast at the bottom of the league. I really think that all 3 of them will compete next season. And then to round off the video, we have Birmingham City, and I'm actually going to throw them into the good category. With everything that went on with Birmingham over the summer with the EFL, them being hit with a transfer embargo, and then eventually them getting a 9 points deduction, I think the job that Gary Monk has been able to do at the club there has been absolutely fantastic. It would be very easy for the fans to sort of turn on the club when they're in this sort of dire situation. Last season, Birmingham were the lowest scorers in the Championship. He's more than rectified that. Found a fantastic strike partnership between Adams and Djukovic. Those two have played off each other fantastically. Birmingham were limited in the players they could bring in, but they've still been competitive throughout the year. Before they got that points deduction, they were even challenging for the top 6. And they had Lee Camp in net for a whole year, and they went on to have one of the tightest defences in the league. So if that's not worth appreciation, then I don't know what is. So all in all, I think they've had a fairly good season actually. But as you can see on screen now, guys, there are all my rankings for this year's Championship club. So do you agree with how I have ranked their season? Let me know in the comments down below. Would you move where I put your club? There are a couple where I'm still not so sure. I'm up for moving a few of them, I think. But I'm interested to know what you guys have to say about that. But apart from that, guys, that will now wrap up for this video. So if you did go on to enjoy, make sure you leave a like. It is always massively appreciated. As well as that, make sure you subscribe for some regular Championship content. But apart from that, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one.